When it comes to whether we should allow people to own guns or not, I think both sides make very good points and both sides make terrible points. I'm going to discuss it a little bit. When I hear people say, well, I have a Second Amendment right to own guns in case the government ever tries to take away my freedom, I think that's a very bad argument. For one, the military is so strong, the only thing you're going to do with your AR-15 is probably get killed. And number two, these same people who say this are also the ones that want to spend an exorbitant amount of money on the military. It's like you don't understand. The stronger the military is, the harder it's going to be to overthrow it. I just got through reading this book, Waco by David Thibodeau. He was one of the survivors of the Waco, Texas massacre. I think the law enforcement officers were correct in trying to arrest David Koresh because he was having sex with underage girls. But everybody else, they were basically having their religious freedom rights violated by the government. So they decided to use their AR-15s to fight against the government. And they won the first battle, but as we all know, in the end, most of them were killed. So the whole idea of, oh, the government is violating my rights, so I'm going to use my guns to try to protect myself, you're just delusional. People will say, well, Bill, they can't kill all of us. Well, they certainly have the military capability to, because you have spent so much money on the military that you're planning on overthrowing. But they really don't have to kill all of you. Just enough of you to intimidate everyone else into surrender. But for argument's sake, let's say you do succeed in overthrowing the government by some miraculous means. What then? What are you going to replace it with? Are you going to replace it with the government that we elect our own representatives? Or are you just going to declare Trump dictator for life? I think people who make this argument about the Second Amendment and overthrowing the government haven't really put much thought into it. In my opinion, the Constitution is a great document. The founders were geniuses for coming up with it. But it was a very early form or early new type of government that had not been tried much before. So they did not know it was going to work so well. So that's why they included the Second Amendment, just in case the government started infringing upon people's rights. They had their guns and it was at least feasible for them to overthrow the government. In my opinion, if they had known that having a democracy where people elected their own representatives was going to work so well, they would not have included the Second Amendment. But I could be wrong, though. I think people who make these arguments just love their guns so much that they're being irrational, which I can't understand. I have owned guns before. I love guns. But we got to, put our biases aside and be rational about it. I do think gun advocates do make some very good points. People do use guns successfully in protecting themselves. Somebody might break into your house and that gun might save your life. So my position is I think responsible gun owners should be allowed to own guns, but only the responsible ones. There are some people who should not be allowed to own guns. 4 weeks ago, a little 6-year-old kid who had mental disabilities took his mom's gun to school and shot the teacher. I think any reasonable person should be able to say, yeah, his mom should not be allowed to own guns. So, but if you do own guns, you should be required to prove that you can be safe with it, that you understand safety. And if you ever have a gun accident, you should have your gun taken away from you. I'm speaking to you, Dick Cheney. I also think that teachers who are responsible gun owners and have proven they understand safety should be allowed to take their guns to school as concealed weapons. But these same teachers should be told and understand that there will be severe consequences if they are not responsible with their guns. I think this would help with school shootings. It would reduce some of the number of kids who get killed when these things happen. Now, a person who is against that, when I was speaking to her, she said, no, that's a terrible idea. We should just have armed security guards instead. Well, that will do no good because the school shooter is just going to go kill the armed security guard first and then probably take his gun and he'll have an extra gun to kill extra people. So not only will it do no good, it might cause more harm. And then she said, well, you don't need an AR-15. Well, what exactly is it about an AR-15 that you think should be prohibited? Is it the fact that it's semi-automatic? Is it what exactly is it? It became obvious to me that this person didn't know anything about guns. They basically just thought AR-15s look scary, so therefore people should not be allowed to own them. If somebody was to break into my house to harm me and my loved ones, I don't know what kind of weapon they have. So I would want to use an AR-15 to make sure I have superior firepower. So I actually do think AR-15s are arguably necessary. I think some people feel this way because they just hate guns, which I can understand, but they need to put their biases aside, just like the people who love guns. They tell me, oh, but if you own a gun, it's a lot more likely to be used against you than to protect you. And they point to some kind of studies or some kind of arguments. I never really believe these arguments. I think they have too many confounding factors to be reliable evidence. I think the people who come up with these studies are basically just hate guns and they're biased against them, and that bias affects the studies and their conclusions, especially when I read the way they word it. Stuff like, well, countries that have guns have more gun violence. Well, of course, countries that have more guns will have more gun violence. It doesn't mean that countries that have less guns have less violence. I pride myself on being open-minded, so I'm not married to any of my ideas. So if you disagree with me or agree with me, let me know in the comments, and I'll consider your arguments with an open mind. You might be able to change it. I have changed my opinion before about issues.